How do you keep something secret? You hide it in plain sight.
1952 was one of the biggest years of UFO sightings in U.S. history. The culmination of that year was incredible sightings over the weekend of July 19th, 20th, and 26th, 27th.
Project Sign was the initial response, but it only lasted for just over a year. At first, it appeared as if the U.S. Air Force were trying to actually discover what the unidentified flying objects were.
You've got these reports of these objects flying over the nation's capital.
A week later, the situation essentially repeats itself.
Project Sign was actually taken somewhat seriously. According to the report of a captain of the U.S. Air Force, Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, the intelligence specialists at the Air Technical Intelligence Center, ATIC, were so confident of getting answers to the UFO problem within a year at most. By the way, you might want to keep the name of Captain Edward J. Ruppelt in mind, because he would later become a Project Blue Book director and the author of a book titled The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. Back to Project Sign, the UFO problem that the intelligence specialists at ATIC was looking to solve had nothing to do with if these UFOs existed or not. It was more about where it is from.
Andrews Air Force Base scrambles 2 F-94 jet interceptors to investigate what was going on. The Air Force really had to say something, so they held the largest press conference since the end of the Second World War, run by the head of Air Force Intelligence, General Samford.
I am here to discuss the so-called flying saucers. The Air Force interest in this problem has been due to our feeling of an obligation to identify and analyze to the best of our ability anything in the air that may have the possibility of threat or menace to the United States. In pursuit of this obligation, since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them, explain them to our own satisfaction. We've been able to explain them as hoaxes, as erroneously identified friendly aircraft, as meteorological or electronic phenomena, or as light aberrations.
Could it be the Russians at work, or should we really gaze into space for answers? Could these UFOs have come from some other planet? Their findings would cause an internal split inside the group. There were those who believed that the UFOs were indeed from outside the planet Earth, while there were others who maintained that it couldn't be true.
It's very easy to set up a false flag operation, concoct all kinds of false information. They have people embedded in all the major media to change and affect stories. If you tell anyone about this project, this bullet has your name on it and it will find you.
By the time Project Sign ended, the official results were inconclusive. In their report, the flying saucers were neither confirmed nor denied. But that really wasn't the end of it. A document was authored by the project in 1948, and the document was called The Estimate of the Situation. This document was sent to the command chain of the U.S. Air Force.
If you look at the document sent to J. Edgar Hoover, 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. It has become the #1 document viewed on the FBI website.
Harry Truman made some phone calls to try to get some information on what was going on.
Government people coming out of their offices saw these objects, and you couldn't tell them that it hadn't happened.
Ruppelt revealed that the majority of the specialists who worked on Project Sign were particularly impressed by one of the many reports of sightings. This particular report was the Childs-Whitted UFO encounter of the 24th of July, 1948. This incident involved 2 pilots whose Douglas DC-3 airliner was almost hit by a torpedo-shaped UFO.
It's interesting that both of these pilots drew what they saw. And what you find is they are remarkably similar. They both show this elongated object.
The conclusion was that the level of technology that must have gone into such an aircraft could not have been realistic for either the U.S. or the USSR. The only logical explanation was that it was from another planet. This belief was stated clearly in the document. But guess what? The document was rejected by the Air Force for lack of physical evidence. What's more, all copies were ordered to be destroyed. The U.S. Air Force would later deny the existence of this document, even resisting any attempt to use the Freedom of Information Act in getting a hold of it.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin. During a 3-year investigation, I found that many pilots have described objects of substance and high speed. One case, pilots reported their plane was buffeted by an object which passed them at 500 miles an hour. Obviously, this was a solid object, and I believe it was from outer space.
However, Ruppelt and several other sources confirmed the existence of this document. One of these sources was Dr. Alan Hynek. Dr. Hynek was a scientific consultant and UFO skeptic brought in to work on both Project Sign and Project Blue Book.
I was called into the meeting on Thursday. The panel members were seated around this table. It was a rather somber and impressive occasion, actually. I was a junior member, and I remember feeling considerably nervous and apprehensive about being in front of this powerhouse of scientists. But then for the past 4 years, I had been scientific advisor to the U.S. Air Force on this very problem. There were 2 films that were of particular interest to the panel at that time. One was a film taken by a Navy officer while on vacation in Utah, near Tremonton, Utah, and the other was a film taken in Great Falls, Montana, by the owner of the local baseball team. The Utah film had already been subjected to some 1,000 or so man-hours of analysis by the Navy's Photographic Interpretation Laboratory. So the panel got up from their chairs and crouched around the wall to examine the films, and they asked to have the films run several times, as a matter of fact. Now, the Navy had, on the basis of their detailed analysis of the Utah films, they had concluded that the objects shown on the films could not be birds, balloons, aircraft, and so forth, but indeed that they were self-luminous, unidentified objects. Despite this conclusion, the panel rejected it and concluded that the objects were birds. They couldn't be unidentified, therefore they had to be birds. I came away from the meeting and from the room with the distinct feeling, however, that the panel had deliberately moved to debunk the whole subject and not to give it the serious scientific attention which it deserved.
His role and shocking transformation will be discussed shortly. But Project Sign wasn't shut down to start Project Blue Book. There was another project in between. This project is called Project Grudge.
Is there anything in the files, either classified or unclassified, that would indicate that there may be extraterrestrial visitors over here?
First of all, the project is completely unclassified. And there is nothing in the records which would indicate that we have been visited by any advanced civilization.
How does the Air Force look upon people who make reports of UFOs? Do they look on them as qualified observers?
Yes, they do look on them as qualified observers. Actually, most people who report a UFO sighting are patriotic citizens who have been mystified by something that they've seen, and through a patriotic sense, report it to the local law enforcement officials or to the United States Air Force base near them.